Hello and welcome to our podcast, Everyday People, Extraordinary Performance. And today we are joined by Ian Noble, training manager and consultant, whose diverse career has taken him across the globe. From teaching English to Saudi Air Force personnel to running an academic department in China, Ian's journey is nothing short but remarkable. One chapter that stands out is his time in the Marshall Islands, where he spent a year volunteering as a teacher. And in this episode, Ian is going to share his invaluable lessons he learned from living and working in such a unique environment and how those insights influence his approach to training, leadership, and team development. So, welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, obviously, the intro already gives us quite a bit of information about yourself, but why don't you take us a little bit through that incredible journey, a bit about your background and how have you ended up on an island?
I guess in order to get to the Marshall Islands, I have to take you back to Australia. I moved to Australia when I hit 30. I panicked when I hit 30 and I decided I needed to change things up. So I moved to Australia and studied primary teaching and loved it. Worked in a couple of schools in Brisbane and in an Aboriginal community up in Cape York, in the top of Australia. And I enjoyed it so much that when the Aboriginal school offered me a job for the next year, I accepted and I was looking forward to it. However, the one catch was that I needed a visa because I was on a student visa, so I needed a working visa. And I guess there was maybe a bit of complacency, just thinking that would just happen naturally because they struggled to get teachers up to the school because it was so remote. So I think it was a case of, well, somebody wants to do it, so it'll be easy just to get them a visa. And school was starting in January, and come December, I still didn't have a visa for the new year. And then I didn't get the visa because there was a change in kind of government procedures as to who was getting visas and what job roles were applicable to get visas. So my visa was running out. So I actually had to hightail it out of Australia quite quickly. And because I had this job lined up, I wasn't really worried about saving money and doing all those grown-up things. So I didn't have a lot of money left. So I needed a job that would get me a flight out of Australia, would give me accommodation, and I was hoping for some upfront pay, almost like a kind of signing on bonus. So I ended up in Saudi Arabia, which was a bit dodgy. I didn't really know who I was going to be working for or even where I was going to be working. So when I got there, I was picked up by this random person at the hotel who had a sign that said ION Nobel. And I was like,
what's that?
I still forgot to read. So you're good, pal. So I jumped in his car and he took me to the hotel where I would be staying, which I didn't know if that was a hotel for the night or if that was me. So I was in the middle of Riyadh. I was trying to ask this guy questions. He didn't speak English. And I ended up there for a couple of days before someone came along and said, here's a train ticket. You need to go to Khobar, which is on the kind of east coast. So I ended up getting a train there and I found out that I was teaching Saudi Arabian Air Force personnel how to speak English, which is as much fun as it sounds because they do not want to learn how to speak English. So I was in Saudi Arabia. My job was okay. It wasn't really why I got into education in the first place. It was very much teaching an American English curriculum on a kind of 2-week basis. And the Air Force personnel had to pass in order to be able to carry on doing their normal job. And while they were learning the English, they weren't getting paid the same rate as they would normally be getting for their normal job. So they really hated me. And if they failed it, they had to do the 2 weeks again. So not that enjoyable. When people talk about going into the Middle East, especially Saudi, everyone imagines living in a compound with other Western like-minded people. But I was in general population. So there was not a lot to do. I had a gym, which was good. And I had a cafe where they were quite keen on playing the English football, which was great. And when they went off prayer, they would actually lock me in there, which was great because otherwise I would have to leave. So they were quite good there. But I also didn't have much of a a kind of social life. There wasn't much social interaction. And I was very much a believer that there's kind of three big elements of your life, which is your work, your living conditions, and your social environment. And if you've got all three, great. You can flourish, you can be happy. If you've got two out of three, then it's okay. You can make do. If you've got one out of three is bad, you should probably change. And if you've got zero out of three, then you need to go and live in a desert island, clearly. So that's what I did. I had this random search on the internet looking for like-minded countries that wanted to pay people and not tax them. Because I thought I'd clearly need to put some cash in the bank. And I came across this country called the Marshall Islands, which I'd never heard of before. And I looked it up and I thought this is just a country of desert islands. Like, it's so random. I don't even know what you would be doing there. And I kind of skimmed past it. And then I was looking for jobs and I was using this website called Dave's ESL or EFL Cafe. It was a great website for people who taught English as a foreign language. And I'd already been through it, but then I decided to go back a couple of days. And don't ask me why I decided to do this, but I went back a couple of days and then I found an advert for the Marshall Islands again. And I'd never heard of Marshall Islands. And all of a sudden I'm hearing about it twice in the space of a week. And it was to join a volunteer teaching organization called World Teach. And World Teach was started back in the 60s by a group of Harvard University students who would send people all over the world into remote places teaching the locals how to speak English. So I wrote to them, I made a little application, and I basically said, I only want the Marshall Islands. I know you send people all over the world, but I only want to go to the Marshall Islands. But then they also asked in the formal application about your remote experience, because they have volunteers there that are on the main island and some other islands with fancy stuff like electricity and running water, which wasn't why I wanted to go to the Marshall Islands. So I laid it on pretty thick about only wanting a remote island. And I'd had some remote experience. So obviously I worked in the Aboriginal community. I went round schools in rural Kenya for a few weeks, and I'd travelled quite well, and I was a qualified teacher, which was a bit of a bonus. So I laid it on thick that I wanted an outer island, they call it, so a really remote island. And luckily I got it, and I ended up flying to the Marshall Islands and staying there for a year.
You could have just applied for Bear Grylls, really. That's what I would think.
She's got hotels like 3 miles away and stuff, doesn't it?
I'm kind of desperate to know. So you obviously applied for it. You were desperate to go and have the really remote experience.
Yeah.
What was your first impression when you got there?
So I guess I had a few first impressions, because the first impression is that you fly into the main island, Majuro, which is just one really long island with essentially just one road. Now, it's the main island because it has a road, which is wonderful. But it had like a supermarket, and there was a couple of hotels and stuff like that even. But when you're flying in, on a plane when you're heading down, but you look out one window and it's just water, and you look at the other window and it's just water, and you're getting closer and closer to the ground soon. But yeah, we landed there, and that was kind of my first impression of just how small these islands are. And obviously this one was really long. Somebody said imagine it was 40 kilometers, because so an atoll is basically a circular piece of land, and some of it is high enough to pop out of the surface of the water, hence people can live on it. So that was my first experience of what an atoll was and what it looked like. And particularly on the inside of this atoll, you've got a nice calm lagoon side, and then on the outside of the atoll, you've got an ocean side where you get proper ocean currents and tides and that kind of stuff. But some of the island is incredibly, incredibly small, to the point that if there's a high tide, parts of the island just gets flooded, and that's the norm. So that was a good impression. When I eventually was heading out to my island, I was delayed because the plane was broken. Apparently there was only the country only had 2 planes, which were broken for more days of the year than they were able to fly, which fills you with loads of confidence. So I had to wait a little bit, and then I got a plane, and ended up flying out. And it's a bit of a taxi service, the plane. So you stop on lots of different islands. So you get to see loads of different islands. If they have a bit of grass, a bit of land big enough to land a plane on and take off. And I was lucky. We landed on the right island, which is good, because I heard stories about a plane coming into land and there being pigs on the runway. And then a case of, not today, thank you very much. Just flies to the next island. So managed to land, which was great. And I landed on an island or an atoll called Jalowit, where there was a photo came out not too long ago of Amelia Earhart, and they believed that was the last known photo of Amelia Earhart on this specific atoll. So I landed there. At that point, I wasn't sure if this was my island or I was going elsewhere. And I ended up getting on a small boat and sailing to my island, which was called Imroj, which is about 7 or 8 football pitches long and kind of 3 or 4, depending on the tide, football pitches wide, with no dock or anything like that. So the boat just kind of bumps up onto the sand, and then you jump off, and that's home. So
how many people were living on that island then?
Well, I was told kind of 200 to 250. I mean, I was also teaching in the elementary school, so we had a school. But when I say school, it was like concrete brick building with space for a door and windows, but with no door or windows. But I had a roof, which was the most important thing. So yeah, I heard it was kind of 200 to 250, but obviously the young children you don't really see, or the elders on the island you don't really see. So I would say my experience of who was on the island was probably limited to anywhere between 70 and 100.
Okay.
There was a church on the island, and that was probably where I saw most people every Sunday, and that was kind of maybe 50 odd people would go to the church. So not.
And then how many kids did you teach?
So there was like 50 in the school.
Right.
Although I had some that were too young for school, but they would come, and I would let them just sit in the class anyway, because any exposure to English and learning is great. And there wasn't a lot else for them to do, so why not? Just, if they're going to behave and they can sit and focus and have a laugh, then why not let them come in,
So teaching those kids, was that a lot better than in Saudi, the sort of Air Force, from an audience perspective?
100%. They liked me in Marshall Islands.
Bless.
I didn't hate
Helps. I mean, for me, how many football pitches do you say? Like 7 or 8? I mean, that doesn't feel that big.
No.
For actually the amount of people you did mention. So what was it like with housing? And did you have your own house, or did you share, or how did that?
So I had a hut,
hut, yeah.
which was it basically it was a shed, and I had a shell inside, which was good, so I could pick stuff for myself. And I had a light, and there was a solar panel. So the government had made a bit of an attempt to get some electricity lighting and stuff on island. So I had a solar panel, which gave me a light, which was good because it got dark maybe 6:30. So
Really?
yeah, so having a light was quite good. There was early to bed every Saturday. But yeah, my hut was off the ground, which was good, but there were pigs on the island, and for some reason they just loved sleeping underneath my hut, which was absolutely fine until they decided to have a full-blown riot 3 a.m. So I got woken up a lot by the pigs. But yeah, I had a hut, but there were again some concrete houses on the island. There was nothing inside them. So the concrete kind of brick houses with corrugated roof. And again, they had doors, and I think some had windows or kind of things covering the windows. Again, there was nothing inside, so people just kind of slept on the floor. Some people would have like a roll mat, but they also used coconut leaves a lot to make things like baskets and whatnot. And they would use them to make mats as well that they would lie on, so they didn't have to lie on the ground. Yeah. And there was also some makeshift ones as well.
So then food and drink wise, like how did you feed yourself? Or obviously people in general on the island? Like how did it work?
So fish. You obviously eat
And
a
like,
lot of fish. So I did a lot of fishing and I love fishing. So that was probably my favorite thing. Lots of different types of fishing as well, which was good. However, you can only go fishing if the conditions allow you to. If the water's a bit too choppy, it's obviously difficult. So a lot of fish, a lot of lobster, but there was obviously lots and lots of coconuts. And I had a papaya tree, which was great, but also a lot of rice. So when there was no access to fish because of weather conditions and whatnot, they had kind of bags and bags of rice in supply, which is a kind of hangover from World War One, really, because the Japanese took over the Marshall Islands in World War One, and then the Americans took over in World War Two. So rice is probably a good staple for them to have when there's no access to fishing and whatnot. In terms of drinking, I drank rainwater. I obviously boiled my rainwater, so I drank that, but lots and lots of coconut water. I made the mistake of telling my first class, or my grade 2-3 class on day one, that I liked drinking coconuts. And at lunchtime, I came back after lunch, and I don't know if I had 20 coconuts on my desk in the classroom.
Sweet.
And they're all sitting looking at you, waiting to see if you pick their coconut. So
That's sweet.
yeah, so I drank a lot of coconut water, which was great.
So then, I mean, I presume there's no shop. So is it very much about trade, or how does the rice even get there? I mean, I'm guessing you can't harvest the rice then.
Good question. Stuff just appeared. So I stayed on the land of a host family, and they would feed me because everything got cooked on an open flame. So yeah, they kind of looked after me and cooked all my food and stuff. And sometimes a tin of spam would appear. And this was a delicacy to them because it's American. Anything American was the greatest thing in the world. So spam was a delicacy. I'm certainly going to love a piece of fish, Where I also had corned beef, which saved my mental health quite a lot, seeing this corned beef. But yeah, in terms, there was a shop in the island I flew into on the January Atoll. So there was a shop there because there was a high school, which was essentially a boarding high school. So kids from all of the outer islands, most of them, when they hit the teenage years, they would go to the boarding school. So there was a shop there, and it was quite regular, should have been regular, planes coming in as well as boats coming in, and they would drop off some supplies there. So people from our island would head there and get stuff.
Fascinating.
That just sounds like such an amazing experience, Ian. But I wonder, so you'd said when you were obviously doing your application that you were looking for remote. Did you get there and think, oh, they weren't joking? Was it in line with your expectations, or did you think, oh, I've maybe eaten off a bit much here?
Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't really know too much what to expect, and I thought it'd be cool and different and away from society and stuff like that. But there was a few times I would just stand on the edge of the island and you just look at absolutely nothing, and it's like, wow, this was remote.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I didn't appreciate just how small in the world you feel when there's just absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Well, especially as well if I mean, was there a doctor on the island? So if something happens,
so there was a nurse. She was called Flo, but essentially what happened was people who were on the island basically took roles. So Flo she'd been onto the main island, and I think she qualified as a nurse. So she was an actual nurse because there was a hospital on the main island, and so yeah, Flo was a nurse. I didn't realize that until probably about 4 or 5 months in, and I actually didn't realize probably until about 6 months in that there were police on the island. And it was because there was somebody important. I don't know if it was an elder or a member of government came to the island. All of a sudden, these people that I knew just by their names were wearing these police T-shirts.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, why are we telling that? Because we're the police. And I was like, all right, okay.
Good to know.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot for them to do, you know? So,
So what was your sort of daily structure, your daily life there? I mean, was it
well,
every day the same, or was it actually quite different?
most days were the same, especially Monday to Friday. I guess the only structure on the island was school starting and school finishing, which should have been on the same time unless somebody forgot to ring the bell. And I get a late start, or you're wondering why you're still in school. And church was always at the same time on a Sunday. So you had that structure there to kind of anchor yourself into a bit of normality, which was good. But then after school, I would try and do something. So whether I was doing a bit of fishing or learning about something in the island or trying to do a bit of exercise or something like that, that gave me a bit of kind of normality. But again, only if the kind of weather permitted you to do that. There were some weekends I would lie on my hammock for 8 hours. Sure. I would wake up, go lie in my hammock, eat a couple of times, and then it got dark and I'd go to bed.
And was that lying in the hammock because you were exhausted, or because the weather didn't permit you doing anything? Is that
Yeah, just because there was nothing else to do.
yeah?
And it was very, very jungly. So you could lie in a hammock and get some shade. If you went to the kind of edges of the island, you were in the direct sunlight, and like that pasty Scottish guy, that wasn't the best place for it to be. So yes, I had a bit of normality. Sometimes there was nothing to do, but then sometimes there'd be an excursion that nobody seemed to really tell me about until it was happening. And I had to just react and go, because I always wanted to go and do stuff. You know, I was always asking people if they could take me fishing or take me to a different island and stuff like that.
I know there's one story that I'm really keen to hear again, because I have heard it, and that's the only thing that I actually know about your whole island
Yeah.
experience. The time you went fishing, you didn't know what you were doing. Do you want to tell us about that one?
But that was most of the times I went fishing, I didn't know.
Okay. Every time.
But yeah, I think the one I mentioned before was, I found out afterwards, it was because the high school, so the boarding school I talked about, it was running out of food. So different people from different islands got together. And again, don't ask me how they communicate this, because whenever I asked anything, I didn't really get an answer. So you just have to kind of figure things out. But they always knew what was going on. So school was running out of food, so everyone kind of got together to catch some fish. Now, as part of the government bringing the outer islands into the kind of 21st century, a lot of islands were given a boat, so kind of like a speed, their engine, which is great if you have diesel to put in it. So everyone got together, got lots of diesel in the engines, and there was, maybe about 8, 9, maybe even 10 boats all getting together, and we went out fishing. But there was no fishing rods, no spears, which we used most of the time, and no line. Sometimes we just did line fishing, so on a line, but without a fishing rod, and you just use your hands to bring it in. But there was none of it. There was no materials to catch fish. So we went, and we were in these boats, and we're just in the middle of the ocean, just sitting still, not doing anything. And I was trying to ask what we're doing. We're waiting. And I would ask, what are we waiting for? And they would say the birds. No, like, that's not fishing. I still don't know what we're doing. But what was happening was, we would see lots of birds kind of diving into the water around the same area. And this was where coral had grown up, close to the surface of the water. So the fish were close to the surface. So the birds would come in and get them. So we'd all be sitting around waiting. We'd see that bit of activity from the birds. And then the boats would just shoot off. And then it would just nicely come into line. So it was like a military operation. All these boats are in a line. And then they started turning. And as they started turning, I'm watching people jumping off these boats, thinking, I have no idea what's going on here. And I have no idea what my responsibility is in this fishing expedition. But it became very apparent very quickly that my responsibility was to jump off this speeding boat. So naturally I did it with no questions asked.
No questions.
So then we were about kind of 30 or 35 people in a circle, and this red string got passed around the circle. And apparently it has to be red. No other color works. And we made this circle, and because it's red, the fish wouldn't pass the red string. Again, any other color they would apparently pass, but red, they didn't pass. And we gradually just made the circle smaller and smaller and smaller. And then somebody came along with a boat, and they had this kind of manufactured goal. So it was a few bits of wood and then a net. And we would usher the fish into as close a circle as we could, and then just start slapping the water so that all the fish would jump into the net. And then we get the fish, and then we go back in the boat and we eat some, and then it all gets taken to the school. We got some of it, but most of it gets taken to the school. But you have to be very careful, because some of the fish, they try and escape. So they won't go past the red string, but they'll try and jump. So it's easy to get a bust lip or a bust nose because you've got a fish smashing your face. And one of the guys on my host family, he actually got bit by a shark, not when I was there, but before I was there, because the sharks come along because there's so much activity in the water, and we've done the work for them. It's a free lunch, so they try and have some fish, and unfortunately, a shark obviously thought his foot was a fish. He was okay, by the way, didn't lose his foot or anything.
I mean, obviously that is quite an interesting activity to do without any communication almost.
Yeah.
So what did that activity really teach you? Or I know you bring this into your training material quite a bit as well. So how can you relate to that? Like, what do you do in a workshop now when I know you tell the story?
On reflection for me, like, there was a few expeditions like that. There was one similar. We did it between islands, and people were kind of jumping out of the boats, but then other people were probably 3/4 of a mile away, just walking between the islands. And I thought they were doing something completely different, but they were actually taking the rocks from between the islands to make a kind of gate and an area. And we were just ushering the fish in, and they would make that area. But to begin with, it just looked so disconnected, because everybody was doing different, with groups of people doing different things all over the place. And it was the same with the boat in the red string, where everybody just seemed to know what to do. And that's why, when I think about what a high-performing team is, I always kind of go back to that. I think about the fact that there didn't need to be a lot of communication. There didn't need to be a huge meeting and how to do it or anything like that. Everybody just seemed to know, but also trust that everybody knew what to do and everybody would take care of their part in it. And if it didn't go to plan, then that's okay. They would just readjust. Again, they knew how to readjust without much communication. And so I guess I take that into what a high-performing team is, where people are so in line and so in tune that they're just able to connect and move as one unit without having a meeting every 5 minutes.
Your communication, I mean, the English, was it good for them? Was it very much you could communicate with them in English?
Yeah. So most of the adults, I think, spoke some element of English, because they do have a relationship with America after World War II, and they use the US dollar, and they can go to America without a visa, or a specific kind of visa. So the English was actually good. So it was more it wasn't necessarily a language barrier that there was no communication. It was just a cultural thing that they just didn't communicate in that way. And I wanted all the details. So I want to know what the plan is before I go and do it. And I'd ask, and it wasn't that they wouldn't tell me. Sometimes they didn't know, because they knew it would just happen as it happened. And they were okay with that. I wasn't so okay with that when I'm jumping into shark-infested water, but we got there.
So, what was some of the kind of biggest challenges that you faced during the road? You kind of touched on it there, maybe in terms of the fact that they were okay going with short plan, whereas you obviously do like having a plan and like knowing the details. So was it that, or was there other kind of main challenges that maybe threw you during your time?
I wouldn't even say that was a challenge. It was probably just something I had to learn and accept that's the way it was. I didn't really struggle with it once I understood it.
Okay.
And probably the biggest challenge for me was loneliness. And I felt about this when I delivered mental health workshops, how sometimes we can be surrounded by people, but still be incredibly lonely because people don't necessarily understand who we are or the ways of doing things. And even though you're with people all the time, you're still lacking that normalized connection that you have. Like sometimes I struggled to be alone, and I don't mean I struggled with it. I mean, the kids wouldn't leave me alone. Like sometimes they would just come and sit and watch me lying on my hammock doing nothing. So there was always people there. I remember sitting on the door of my hut, and I was having a shave because I took some razor blades and I took a mirror, and I was having a shave, and there must have been about 20 of them because it was a double-sided mirror, just trying to see themselves in the mirror. So I couldn't do it. Even the first week, the kids were, oh, but Mr. Noble's away at the toilet. Like, that's not news. Like, you don't need to tell everyone everything I do. So even though there was loads and loads of people there and around me all the time, having that kind of normal understanding connection, because they obviously had struggles, and I tried to understand those struggles, and I had struggles, but I didn't feel I had anyone to understand and empathize with my struggle. So I guess the loneliness was a big lesson. Also, how much food affects your mood, because there were days and days where I would just have plain white rice for lunch and for dinner. And I don't know if you've eaten plain white rice for a couple of days in a row, but it starts to affect your mood. So that was probably a big one for me as well. And probably the frustration as well, knowing that there were beautiful fish in the water, but the tide was too rough for it, so there was that struggle.
Do you feel like it affected the people there as well, or were they quite acclimatized to that? Or would you say rice for 3 days, did that affect their mood as well?
It was hard to tell because they're probably the most laid back people I've ever met in my life. There is a thing called island time, which is you do things when things happen. I remember, as an example, there was a meeting after school, and school finished at 3, 3:30, whatever it was. So you would assume that this after school meeting would happen when school finished. And it did for some people. So some people would kind of stroll in, and some of the teachers would stroll in. But then you're sitting there for an hour, and everyone's just chilling. Some people having a sleep. And I'm sitting there looking around going, are we going to start the meeting? Oh no, we're just waiting. Not everyone's here, so we're just waiting. And then 2 hours passed, and I'm like, do you know that they're coming? Like, nobody's saying anything. And I hate waiting. And 3.5 hours passed, and somebody strolls in, and it's just the norm. Okay, everyone's here, now we'll start. There's no ounce of annoyance that people have been waiting for 3 hours for this meeting to start, and I am pulling my hair out.
I was going to say, there was definitely an ounce of annoyance. I felt it from you there. So
everything not having its own time, and even if it does have its own time, it's clearly just a suggestion. You can take it on board if you like. So yeah, in terms of how they reacted, I guess it was difficult to tell because everything was so laid back. They just what they did what they needed to do at the time, and that was it, really. Yeah.
Was there a lot of lessons learned or things that you saw there, how they coped with their patients and things like that, that you felt that's something I need to take into my personal life because they've sussed it out, they've worked it out? Is there anything, clearly not the patients?
No.
Part?
No. I guess probably just your acceptance to accepting how things are around you. The weather is the weather. If you can go fishing, you go fishing. If you can't, then you don't. It's as simple as that. And if you need to eat white rice for a week and a half and nothing else, then you just do it. You just get on with it because there's no point in moaning about it. There's no point being upset about it because it doesn't change the situation you're in. So I guess that really just kind of accepting what you have while at the same time being grateful for what you have. Because I remember the day that my papaya tree fell down in a cyclone and I missed that papaya tree. I did not appreciate it enough when I had it. was a devastating day.
What happens when there is a cyclone coming? What do you do? Where do you hide?
You're just hunkered down. I mean, I got checked on a few times because I was just in this flimsy wooden hut. So I spent the first probably week kind of fixing the holes in the roof and moving my bed because there was a drip there. So it was a bit flimsy. I was checked on a couple of times, but again, as I said, because it was like I guess it was like a jungle. So when you were in the middle of it, you were actually quite protected.
Right.
Unless they had what's called a king tide, which was a really, really big high tide, and then the water would come onto the land. But again, my hut was raised off the ground, so
Absolutely fascinating in terms of how adaptable you had to be and just resilient to, as you say, it's just a life, and you can only control what you can control. If it's outside of that, then there's not much point worrying about it. So are there any kind of training parallels in terms of things that you took away from your time there that you then moved into your day job with Fit as Oak?
not too many, because I guess I mean I was teaching elementary, so I was teaching
Yeah.
from grade 1 to grade 7, and it was just English. But I guess what I did a lot was I had conversational lessons.
Mhm.
And that's what I really enjoy doing in the workshops, is learning through conversation and having that kind of cognitive discovery, because you're just figuring stuff out rather than being told, this is the information, this is the content. It's your job to now understand that. Having the conversation about how things happen and how they should happen allows you to start contextualizing things and realizing how you can apply that learning. So we did lots of conversation. But we also did lots of just kind of figuring out fun ways to do things, because there were no real resources, there were no textbooks, there was no videos that I could show them or anything like that. So it was about how to make things fun. And I did teach my grade 2-3 class "Fly Me to the Moon" by Frank Sinatra, which was great fun. And I have a video of them all up a tree in "Fly Me to the Moon." I'd be lying in my hammock and I would just hear "Fly Me to the Moon." And some kid just walking along, just singing this like Frank Sinatra tune, or somebody walking along just whistling Frank Sinatra. And that gave me a bit of joy, because it was great fun, but it was just a different way to learn English. Because I got excited when I first arrived. We started doing the alphabet song.
Mhm.
And they took off with it. They knew it. So they knew the full alphabet song. But then I asked them about the individual letters, and they didn't know them. Or if I had a blackboard and some chalk, so if I wrote them on the board, they didn't know them. So even though they knew the song, they didn't actually know the bits in between and what it meant. So having a wee Frank Sinatra song kind of to help things along a bit.
It's interesting how you have to be resourceful, obviously, if you don't have the resources there,
Mm.
and the creativity comes out of you as well,
Yeah.
but probably also from the children. So did you learn quite a lot from them as well? That they taught you something for life almost?
Yeah, just a way of adapting. And again, I had lots of experience of it there, when I would set an activity, and in my head, the activity goes a certain way. But we started doing things, and it's completely out with where I thought the activity was going to go. But we actually see that every single day when we do workshops in organizations, because we all do that. We all find different ways of doing things because we all think differently. And I think that's really important to recognize and remember, especially when we're talking about leadership and high performing teams, that we don't want everyone to do everything the same way. We want everyone to think a different way to solve a problem, or imagine a different way to get something done more efficiently. And it's just that differentiation and how we think something should be done is really important, and important to accept as well, and be okay with that, and not jump in and go, no, this was my way that I planned to do it. Just kind of let things go, because it might be better.
I guess you've stepped out of your comfort zone probably a few times now
Yeah.
in your life with all the traveling that you've done. Was this a more the extreme one? And if so, what have you personally, but also professionally, taken away from that, using your day to day life now, and especially work-wise?
Yeah, I would probably say this wasn't the most extreme example of stepping out of my comfort zone, because I didn't appreciate when I did make that step out of my comfort zone. Probably the biggest step was quitting my job as a lecturer with a good job and a good salary, and selling my house and my car and all those belongings, and moving to Australia to be a full-time student again. That was a big one. But having the courage to do that initially allowed me to have that mentality that it's okay to step out of your comfort zone, and things will work out. And I ended up deciding that I was going to live that period of my life just 1 year at a time. So it was just full of stepping out of your comfort zone. And like comfort zones, the more you step out of it, the more it becomes easier to step out of it, because that becomes your new norm.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Marshall Islands probably wasn't my biggest step out of my comfort zone, but once I was there and so unsure about the culture and how things were done, and in my head, I spent the first 2 months like Mr. Bean, when he goes somewhere and he just doesn't know which direction he should be in, or what he should say, or what he should do. That's how I felt I was, like this kind of Westerner on this island. But yeah, I think in terms of stepping out of your comfort zone and what you can learn from that, usually it's okay. When people step out of their comfort zone, more often than not, things actually work out. And if they don't work out in the way that it was absolutely destined in your own mind to be, then you just shift, because as humans, we are adaptable, and we see that every day. And we saw it with COVID, how much we adapt. And you see it in organizations all the time where the proverbial hits the fan and people have to adapt. And again, more often than not, we come out the other side. And hopefully we've learned the lessons and we can continue learning those lessons from that. But yeah, one of the hardest things working with organizations is that they struggle to do that as an organization. Generally, you find people that are willing to step out of their comfort zone, but as an organization, they want to do what's safe, and they want to keep doing what's safe. And then you end up people saying, well, that's the way we've always done it, or no, we just don't do it that way around here. And then you just get stuck as an organization, because that becomes the culture, that becomes the mentality. And so we need those individuals to be brave enough to say, as an organization, we need to step out of the comfort zone and outside and go on.
And this is perfect, almost closing for this, but also this is where I think organizations, if they actually do want to work on their culture and step out of that comfort zone as a culture, you can put some really interesting elements into workshops and training where people have to step out of the comfort zone, but as a team, as a culture within that organization, and that actually then triggers change and helps people to move on and change something.
Yeah.
And that's where you really have to capture people.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is really important when you said you step out of your comfort zone as a team. And that to me is what starts building a high performing team, where people, they have that anxious moment of stepping out of the comfort zone, not knowing if things are going to go well. But when you do it as a team, yes, it gives you that confidence to do it more, but it also starts to gel you more as a team, and you create that team cohesion because you've been through that anxious experience. And when we do our workshops at Finish All, we try and put people into those kinds of situations, whether it's through conversation or whether it's through an actual activity. We try and encourage that stepping out of the comfort zone as a team, because it's what gels people together.
Fascinating. There's only 3 more questions that we want to ask you.
Sure.
At the end of the podcast, we want to ask specific questions, so we're going to do that. And I'll start it off with the first one. What does extraordinary performance mean to you?
So extraordinary performance, as obvious as it sounds, is doing extra. But that doesn't mean doing more in terms of time or effort. It means doing different. And I think that's what extraordinary is. It's, as we just kind of talked about, it's about stepping out of the comfort zone and going outside the norm and being brave enough to do it, but also being brave enough to have the thought in the first place about being innovative and challenging the status quo. Because if we don't challenge the status quo, then we are just ordinary. And if we want to be extraordinary, if we want to grow, then we need that innovation. We need people to challenge. I read a decent article not too long ago about being a devil's advocate. And I do enjoy being a devil's advocate, and I do enjoy challenging, probably too much sometimes. But I think we need that in organizations. We need that to disrupt not just what we're doing, but how we're thinking. We need people to think different ways if we want to grow and we want to improve. So definitely doing extra, but doing extra in terms of doing what's different.
I think that's fabulous. Love that. Being the devil's advocate, 100%. That's brilliant. So, second question, what does a high-performing team look like to you?
Yeah, so I mentioned it with my examples in terms of the fishing, and it's just when everybody seems to know what's going on, and if something doesn't work, then the whole team shifts and adapts. It's not individuals that adapt. But again, the only way you can have that is by having trust that the people will know that. And again, I used to play amateur football, and I was lucky enough to play with a lot of my friends. And there were some friends that you played with that you didn't have to look, but you knew where they'd be. You knew what move they would make, what run they would make. And it just gave you confidence within yourself to perform your job, knowing that you trusted them to perform their job. So I think that connection with a high-performing team, or the human connection in a high-performing team, is really important. So you get that with trust, but you also get that with knowing each other as well. There's a bit of work by the MIT Human Dynamics group, they're called, and they looked at the differences between a group and a team. And one of the things about a high-performing team is that they do get to know each other outside their normal team meetings and things like that. And they do continue conversations outside of that formal team setting. And they just get to know each other. And you build that emotional connection with people and that relationship with people. And that's what builds trust, but also builds that understanding where you don't need to have meetings. You don't need to have too much communication. You just know that people are going to do what they need to do.
Last question.
Yeah.
What does good leadership look like to you?
Good leadership. My first thought on good leadership is get out of the way. And you might have heard people talking about this before, where you hire good people and then you just get out of the way and let them do what you've hired them to do. But again, that comes with trust and building a relationship as well, but also hiring the right people. I remember an old boss, a friend of mine, Callum, he promoted me into a position. And one of the things that he did during the interview process was recognize his own weaknesses. And he recognized where I would fill those weaknesses. So we could actually work together, which I think is an absolutely fabulous thing to do, because it shows your vulnerability as a leader. And it shows that as a leader, you're not expected to know everything. You're not expected to be an expert in everything, but you just hire people who help you achieve what you need to achieve, but you do it together. And I think that's really important. I also think the important thing with leadership is understanding the difference between being a manager and being a leader. And we see it where people are promoted into leadership positions because of their technical ability, not because they have the skills and attributes to be a great leader. And that's okay sometimes, but then we need to train them. We need to give them the leadership training. We need to give them the skills and the attributes. And that's what we can do as part of our workshops. But it also needs a bit of coaching, because it doesn't happen overnight. It certainly doesn't happen in a day's training course. And it needs to be that continual improvement. And I guess the other thing is recognizing that managers deal with things and procedures, whereas leaders deal with people. And when you promote people who don't have the skills of a leader, then the leaders just start using people as assets, and they start using the people as things instead of motivating them, instead of inspiring them, instead of influencing, because that's what a leader should do. Motivate, inspire, influence, and then get out of the way and let them do what you hired them to do and what they're hopefully great at doing.
Thank you so much, Ian. It's been an absolute pleasure. I mean, the Ellen experience, definitely not what I would want to do.
No,
but if you ever apply for Big Girls, I'll definitely watch, because I think you'd smash it. But no, also you have fascinating insights in terms of how, taking things from your life experience, but in general, what to do in workshops and how to take that across to organizations was really interesting and inspiring. So thank you so much for joining.
No worries.